We really haven't talked a lot about Alfred Hitchcock yet on this channel, despite the fact that he's got several movies on the AFI list and a couple on the favorites list as well. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. Well, that's about to change with this review. Hitchcock is probably one of the most influential movie directors in history. With his innovative cinematography and editing techniques, he has influenced many, if not most, of today's modern directors, especially in the field of psychological thrillers. And one of the quintessential Hitchcock films, as one of the quintessential psychological thrillers, is the appropriately named Psycho, the story of a lonely hotel owner and his bizarre and troubled relationship with his mother. This is another one of those films that so overshadows the book that it's based on that many people aren't even aware that it is based on a book. But this novel, really more of a novella by Robert Bloch, is recognized as an exemplary story in the horror genre. But which one provided the more frightening story and the more interesting psychological drama? Let's find out. This is Books vs. Movies review of Psycho. We begin with our main character, the one that the whole story focuses around, Norman Bates. Even though it's kind of hard to call him the protagonist, the story does focus around the character of Norman Bates. He lives and works in the Bates Hotel, which he co-runs with his mother, or so he claims. He's introduced as a very timid man of really no consequence, completely ordinary and completely dominated by his mother. You feel sorry for him, but at the same time you get the feeling that there's something not quite right about him, and you're not entirely sure whether it's just social awkwardness or if there really is something wrong. In the movie, the part was played by Anthony Perkins, who really gave a many-layered performance of this role. When you first see him, you think that he's a fairly normal guy, a little timid and awkward maybe, but down to earth and friendly enough. And then gradually, as you watch him more and more, you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable around him. Maybe it's what he's saying, maybe it's the way that he's looking at certain people, but you just get the feeling that there's something a little off about him. Or at least you think you do. And yet you still want to give him the benefit of the doubt. In a way, though, he's almost too clean-cut in the movie. In the book, he's portrayed as a middle-aged man who's not really much to look at, in addition to being an alcoholic with an obsession with pornography and the occult. Hollywood did what they often do with these types of unlikable characters and made him more palatable, making him into a more likable character, removing some of the more unsavory aspects of his character, and even making him better looking. But in this case, I think this actually strengthens the character quite a bit. Norman Bates in the book is almost a little too obvious with his problems, to the point where you don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for him. And I think that's really key with this character, particularly considering his relationship with his mother, which we'll get to in a later round so as to avoid spoilers for the twist. But the Norman Bates in the movie is all the more fascinating and frightening because at first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with him. He seems like a pretty ordinary, clean-cut guy who you wouldn't expect to be capable of the kinds of things that he does in the movie. I suspect that just a straight reading of his lines in the script probably wouldn't tell us too much, but Perkins' performance really tells us everything that we need to know. That's really the only way to tell that something is wrong with this character, just by watching Perkins act out the part. He always keeps you guessing right up until the very end, and yet you still have a certain amount of sympathy for his situation. Any actor who can make you feel all of those different things about his character at once is giving a very, very powerful performance, and for that reason, I think that the movie Norman Bates is a little bit better than the book. But what about the other characters, the victims, the heroes, and everyone in between? Though the story is about Norman Bates, we don't often follow the story from his point of view. We're usually following somebody else. Let's start with the murder victim, Mary Crane, or Marion Crane in the movie. She stops at the Bates Hotel on her way to meet her boyfriend, Sam Loomis, with $40,000 that she's just stolen from a client at her job, so she can give that to Sam and he can pay off his debts and they can finally be together. And after talking to Norman for a bit, she resolves that this is not the sort of life that she wants to lead, and she decides she's going to take the money back. And then she's beheaded in the shower. And it is her murder that drives the rest of the plot forward. In the book, we see Mary in the first two chapters, and then she's killed. In the movie, though, she's given a lot more screen time, as we actually get to see her relationship with Sam, her decision to steal the money, and her journey to the Bates Hotel. Actually, if you don't already know what happens in the story, you might mistakenly think that she's the psycho, and that this crime that she has committed eventually drives her mad. I mean, she is kind of treated as the protagonist in the beginning, and she's certainly painted in such a way so that we feel sympathy for her plight, even though she is stealing this money. And yet, there's this sense that she might be losing her mind, and so you start to think maybe it's a crime and punishment type of deal, and the guilt that she feels at stealing this money eventually just drives her to madness. So when she's suddenly murdered in the shower, that's doubly surprising because we thought she was going to be our focus. We thought we were going to be watching a completely different movie, and that sort of misdirection is a huge trademark of Hitchcock's films. The book gives us the same backstory, but in a much more condensed fashion. We still get the time to get to know Mary a little bit, but we're not tricked into believing that the story is actually about her. And when it comes right down to it, we don't really need to sympathize with her or feel bad that she died. Her crime and her murder are both just devices to get the plot going. And honestly, showing us all of that stuff with Marion's backstory and all of that stuff in the movie just kind of seemed like padding. From her murder onward, the movie follows the book pretty closely, but the book isn't a long one, and so the movie needed to pad it out a little bit in order to make it into a full-length movie. And to be fair, there really wasn't much else they could have done to pad out the movie other than this, but it kind of distracts from the real psycho in the story. The other characters in the story, Lila, Sam, Arbogast, really don't have that many differences between book character and movie character, which is why I've spent most of the time in this round talking about Mary or Marion. The only other real difference is that the book kind of hints at this budding romance between Sam and Lila while the movie doesn't. And while I'll admit that I prefer the movie's more straightforward approach in this regard, and that the romance is kind of distracting in the book and doesn't really reflect well on either character, it's not so distracting that it takes away from the overall story, especially given that the difference between Mary and Marion is even more distracting. And as for Mother, well, she gets her own round. So it really does come down to the Mary-Marion difference, and I do think that the character is more effective the less we see of her, so I'm gonna give the book to this round, though only by a little bit. But if there's one area where Hitchcock... Excuse me. Hatter. Hi. Hi. How long have you been standing there? Oh, I've been here the whole time, just waiting for my Jimmy Johns. You know, you were in the review and all. You're doing great, by the way. Keep up the good work. Thanks. But if there's one area where Hitchcock has made his mark on the world of storytelling, it's imagery. Okay, so this one might seem like a no-brainer. I mean, it is Hitchcock, the master of creating suspense and tension with visuals, and this movie is definitely a classic in that regard. First off, I love the fact that it's in black and white, despite the fact that it really didn't need to be. There was color film at that time, but for some reason black and white just seems that much creepier. I think if the film had been in color, it wouldn't have been nearly as scary. And the way that the film is shot and edited really adds to that feeling of unease, as we're not quite sure what's going on or who we're looking at or what's going to happen next. There's also the famous shower scene, which proves that you do not have to show absolutely every grisly detail in order to convey a really intense and grisly murder scene. It's important to note, though, that the book does have an inherent advantage regarding the plot twist. Without actually giving the plot twist away, I'll save that for the next round, a lot of the plot twist revolves around what Norman perceives as reality versus what everyone else perceives as reality. And because the book is in text, it's possible to go into Norman Bates's thoughts and to show us what his perception of reality is without actually revealing to us that it's different from everyone else's perception of reality, thus preserving the mystery. But in the film media, we don't have that advantage. Things are shown pretty much as they are, and therefore there's not as much of a mystery. Fortunately, Alfred Hitchcock is no ordinary director, and he was able to do this not only effectively, but maybe even better than the book did. For all that we never actually get a glimpse into Norman Bates's head, Hitchcock uses all the little tricks of filmmaking in order to mislead us into what exactly we're looking at. Which makes the twist, once it's revealed, that much more effective because we can go back and we can look at all these little hints that Hitchcock dropped for us. And that in turn makes the character of Norman Bates that much more difficult to figure out. And in the end, I mean, it is Hitchcock. Not that the imagery in the book wasn't any good, but it wasn't really anything special. It was very straightforward and descriptive and detailed, and that's the way that a story should be, but the movie took those descriptions and those details and took them to a whole new level. A lot of this story is told with the visuals, with the imagery, and the way that it's shot and lit. There's a reason why this movie is one of the most famous, if not the most famous Hitchcock film ever made. And now a somewhat unusual and potentially controversial round, we're going to look at the main antagonist of this story, Mother. Mother. Ed, where's the title screen? Ed? Huh. Guess I'll just have to wait for it. Mother, do you think they'll drop the bomb? Mother, do you think they'll try to break my bomb? Alright, we've pretty successfully avoided talking about spoilers up till this point, but now it's kind of unavoidable. So if you don't want to be spoiled on this story, then skip to the end of the review. So, by all accounts, the person responsible for Mary or Marion Crane's murder is Norman Bates' psychotic mother. But of course, the big plot twist is that Norman Bates' mother is dead, and that the person who everyone thinks of as Norman Bates' mother is actually Norman Bates developing multiple personality disorder. In both versions of the story, the character is pretty much the same. Norman, unable to cope with the fact that his mother is carrying on with a man who's not his father, kills his mother and then is unable to deal with the guilt at having killed her, and so integrates her personality into his personality and convinces himself that she is actually still alive. So the question of which version of the character is better comes down to which version portrayed the multiple personality better and which version revealed the twist better. For my money, the movie did pretty well. I mean, you do have to admire the thought that had to go into the twist, because in this case, the book has the inherent advantage. With text, we're able to go into a person's head and see what they are thinking, and since Norman Bates still believes that his mother is alive and ordering him around, it's pretty easy to show us a scene of her ordering him around. Short of providing inner monologue, which would have been kind of a giveaway given that she's supposed to be a real person, the movie can't really do this. The solution then is twofold. One, obscure Mother's face so that when she is in a scene we can't tell that it's really Anthony Perkins in a dress and a wig. And two, make Norman Bates actually a little bit more independent than his book counterpart so that he can actually act without Mother having to tell him what to do. In the end, it still works. The character is still creepy, and the plot twist is still effective. But with all that said, the book still has the inherent advantage here, and I think it shows in a lot of ways. First of all, yes, you can go into Norman Bates' head, but the way that Robert Bloch does it is very effective, because even though we can read his thoughts, there's still a certain surreality about the whole thing. It's kind of hard to explain, but the descriptions are just vague enough that you get the feeling that there's not really anyone there, but it's not so obvious as to give the twist away. Second, the book gives us the perception that it has nothing to hide. We know who killed Mary. We know what happened to the body. We know what Norman did. We know all of these different things because Robert Bloch gives us access to everything. Or so we think. With a Hitchcock movie, we know that they're hiding something because we never see Mother's face. So you could argue that with the movie, we know that there's going to be a twist even though we don't know what the twist is. Whereas with Bloch, we might not even see the twist itself coming. Finally, I think the movie twist is just a little bit too neat. Especially at the end when they bring out the psychologist to explain everything and there's this sense of, yes, we understand everything now. The book wasn't like this. It was a little bit more raw, and there was a lot more uncertainty, a lot more speculation, and a lot more unpredictability in the character. The book also really emphasizes this idea that it's not really Mother that Norman Bates is being in his multiple personality, but rather his own distorted vision of his mother. And that adds a lot to the creepiness. So, though both book and movie did Mother very, very well, I think I'm gonna give book the round on this one. And now it's... Did you hear that? Arcana? Is that you? And now it's time to see how it all comes together with story. It's easy to see why this story was so effective and so memorable. The story is called Psycho, so you can already tell it's going to be, well, psychological. Here's a story with no monsters, no supernatural elements, but one that deals with perhaps one of the most frightening adversaries of all, our own brain. And on the whole, there really aren't that many differences between the two stories. Probably the thing that I appreciate most about the book is that it's short and to the point. It keeps the story very, very simple, even with regards to the plot twist. It's a straightforward story told in a straightforward way. We know from the very beginning that something is wrong. With Norman, with his mother, even with Mary to a certain extent, we know that something is not quite right here. It's frightening because we know something is wrong, we just don't know what. Also, the final explanation in the movie does get a little long-winded. We don't need to know all the particulars of the multiple personality disorder, we just need to know the basics. And in general, that's what Robert Bloch gives us, the basics. The movie had to pad things out in order to make it into a full-length movie. But to be fair, it wasn't just padding. Most of it did have a purpose. The opening is probably the biggest thing that they changed from the book. The rest of the film is pretty faithful to the story. And like I said earlier, no, it's not strictly necessary to include that 20 minutes of Marion's life in the beginning, but adding that scene really does add another layer to the story. In the book, we barely know Mary. We don't really get to know her, and so it doesn't really hit us quite as hard when she dies. Whereas in the movie, we get to see her life, her relationship with Sam, her decision to steal the money, her journey to the Bates Hotel, so much so that we get the feeling that she's supposed to be the protagonist and she's supposed to be the psycho. Also, she shows kindness and sympathy towards Norman despite his oddness, which in turn helps the audience to show sympathy towards Norman. We see firsthand what a tyrant his mother is because Marion showed him kindness in a way that people really hadn't before, and so when she dies, it's doubly devastating for him. Also, the book hinted at a budding relationship between Sam and Lila, which the movie wisely decided to cut. I mean, you want to talk about padding. Come on, guys. Her sister and his lover was just murdered. Come on. As far as major changes to the story, those are really the big ones, but what really makes this movie stand apart from the book is the tension and suspense that it creates. The book is very simple, and also in many ways very clear-cut. Like, we know that Norman is not well. We know it. It's not speculation for us, it's obvious within the first couple of chapters, whereas in the movie, because of Anthony Perkins' performance, and because the first section of the movie was structured so much around Marion, we really can't tell who this person is, or what he's up to, or how or if he is being manipulated. The movie constantly keeps us guessing. Is Marion the psycho? No, she's dead. Is it Norman? His mother? Someone else? We just don't know. And Hitchcock, of course, is a master of suspense. That's why his movies are so well known. He is always keeping you guessing. And with a bad guy as insidious as the human brain itself, guessing and confusion is kind of a given. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more uncertainty and ambiguity in the ending. That's really the one part that I feel like the book did much, much better than the movie. But while the movie did try to wrap things up a little bit too neatly, there is still a sense that the story is not nearly over yet. So while both stories are told very, very well, I think it's the movie's treatment of this story that works better. And that does it for this Books vs. Movies review. Next time, we'll be looking at... Well done. The review is a success. You seem able to carry on the burden of both Reg and Hatter. Arcana, what are you talking about? I am Hatter.
Hey, it worked better than we thought.
Listen to me. The review is over. You have done your part. You are not Hatter. What the hell is this? Reg, do you know what's going on? Ed?
Way ahead of you.
No idea. Guys, seriously, quit messing around. If he's not Hatter, who is he? I was afraid of this. He's too deeply into the review.
or we're gonna have to snap him out of it.
Maybe you should have Scotty do it since he's more familiar to them.
Scotty?
Oh, Scotty. I didn't see you standing there. We can't get him out of the review. Think you can help?
I can handle it.
Boys, let's talk about the next review.